Okay, so today we're going to be talking a little bit about Ingmar Bergman's Wild Strawberries from 1957. This is one of Bergman's earlier films. He made many. He was prolific throughout the 50s and 60s, simultaneously on the theatrical stage as well as the cinematic screen. So this is a guy who was enamored of storytelling and had many of his own original narratives to share. Wild Strawberries is a film about an older man who is actually approaching the end of his life, and he was played by someone who was approaching the end of his life, Victor Skålstrom, who would die very soon after making this film. It was written with him in mind, right? So it was kind of a coup that Bergman was able to cast the person he wanted to cast into the role of Isak Borg. Let's dive straight into it. We're going to be talking about lighting and camera angles and so on. But the first thing I want to address is the use of dissolves. So in this particular film, Bergman uses dissolves often. Instead of hard cuts, he's not really going for match cuts very often or surprising cuts. He is attempting to create a flow. It's almost like stream of consciousness as we weave in and out of the present and the past, as Isak's mind, as if he were a character in a Virginia Woolf novel, darts back into the past and then comes into the present and then back into the past very fluidly. And the dissolves help to create very smooth transitions between past and present. Here we see Isak stepping back into the past by way of a particular location. He's revisiting the summer house where he used to spend his summers when he was younger with extended family. We see his aunt and a number of close relatives, cousins. One of the things that may strike you as a little bit odd in this film, and this is a cultural and generational difference, is that we hear about cousins being in love with one another and actually even marrying each other. This is something that we would find in our own culture today to be less than healthy, right? In terms of trying to diversify the gene pool and all that, but it is definitely something that you run into often in older stories. So here we see him beginning to imagine the old Sarah. Not the Sarah who travels with him in the present, but the Sarah of long ago who actually ended up marrying one of his brothers instead of himself. Picking Strawberries, thus the title of the film. So this almost looks like a match cut, right? But it's actually a dissolve. If you watch it very closely, you see that one image is slowly laid upon the other. This is the same house, just removed by a few decades, so that the accoutrement on the outside, the dressing, so to speak, has changed over the years. Okay, a few words about shots. So this shot is rather peculiar. This is during a dream sequence in which Isak is beginning to confront, perhaps in ways he hasn't prior to this day, his age, his mortality. He's 78, and he has achieved quite a bit. He's now, 50 years as a practitioner following the earning of his degree. He used to be a specialist, and now I used to be a generalist and then became a specialist, and now appears to be retired. So he's going to be honored for his longevity as well as his professional expertise. His longevity is close to ending, of course, and this is himself, his corpse, reaching out from a coffin. You'll notice that this is an extreme close-up, drawing attention to the hand with which he moves about during the day. He does seem to be pretty limber. He's still able to dress himself and even hasten from one room to another at different points. So there's some youthful vigor, perhaps a little bit, even though his pace has begun to slow. But his hands are one of those things that are going to register his age pretty quickly, like his face. When you look closely at the contours of his skin, though those are a little difficult to see here because of the high key lighting in this shot. There's not a lot of shading here except behind his hand, not across the veins of his hand. So the hand of his dead self reaching out to touch and grab and pull on the hand of his live, living, though dreaming self. And this, of course, is a low angle, as if looking up at Isak from the position of his corpse in the coffin that has just fallen out of this carriage. So Bergman loves to come in really close to his characters, whether it's a close-up shot or whether it's an extreme close-up of just a part of the body, as we see here. These these close-ups, this is perhaps a mid-close-up, this is definitely a close-up, draw us into discomfort. And oddly enough, he's being praised on the left and yet feels very uncomfortable. He's being praised by someone who is remembering fondly what Isak has done for this rural area where he used to live. And he was a general practitioner, and at the close of the scene, he says to himself, almost mumbling, "I wonder if I should have stayed here." He's beginning to question his character and what has motivated him for so many years, which apparently was a desire for renown, for prowess. This is a different kind of renown that he's receiving here. It's very personal. It's unmediated by a hospital or a cathedral or other professionals. Is directly he's just being directly told by someone who actually experienced his expertise, "Thank you. Thank you very much." And he doesn't know what to make of this, because it's an invitation to a kind of intimacy that Isak has prevented himself from experiencing for quite some time. Remember, the beginning of the film emphasizes how he is withdrawn from others because he does not want to think so much about analyzing others. Maybe he's done this a lot. Flashbacks suggest he has, but he's stepping away from that, nor does he want to be analyzed by those that he would bump into if he were being more social. "They all remember your kindness," they say. And then here he's being told by Marianne, his daughter-in-law, that his own son, Ewald, hates him. And he doesn't know how to respond to that. This is similar to the look that he has on his face, a very haggard, haunted look when he is told about a recent very fraught conversation between his daughter-in-law, Marianne, and his son, Ewald, over the question of whether they should bring a new life into the world because Marianne is pregnant. He is burdened by these things, and they are actually not bringing him down. They're actually a weight that falls on his shoulders, but also pushes him forward into change, because he does appear to become, very late in age, a different kind of person by the end of the day. Here we have some long shots of the car as it's moving from Stockholm to Lund, where he's going to be celebrated. It's a very long trip, and he covers a lot of ground with Marianne in tow. Here we see him stopping. He's going to meet the new Sarah of the present, and here is his old home. I love the beauty of this tableau. This looks like it was intended to be framed and stared at for quite some time. It's one of the happier moments from his past as he's revisiting the days of yore, I should say, where we see the younger Sarah with whom he was in love and actually engaged to her for a time, one of her beautiful sisters. These are both actresses, Bibi Andersson and Ingrid Thulin, who will show up in a number of Bergman's later films. And the uncle here, who has hearing problems and comically cannot hear very well the song that has been written for him earlier in the day. Here, B. Anderson's character, the older Sarah, has just yelled at him, right? Her congratulations for it being his name day, his birthday. Smiles all around. And despite the snarkiness of some of the relatives and the betrayal that's happening, this is one of those moments in the midst of all this chaos where we see that there was love shared, that there was love shared. A point that is underscored by the very light colors that the characters are wearing, the pinstripes, and the so much white. If you recall, the characters, almost all of them are wearing this kind of summer white that reflects light back and forth. It's a very bright, vivid, and comforting scene. Here we see Isak regaling the youth, Marianne and Victor, his brother. They are becoming very fond of this older man. They're going to actually attend his ceremony later on and then sing to him late at night under the balcony. A kind of, not a romantic love, but a very sweet love that's being caught here. They're by the seaside, and there's a symmetrical arrangement here. We're actually invited into this burgeoning friendship because we are at the same level as them. Not looking down on them, not looking up towards them, but as if we were sitting at the end of the table. We become part of this happy group. And there's, in the midst of this levity, there is a moment where they begin to quote poetry. And Isak is quoting poetry in response to questions about God. And he says, both at break of dawn my need for him is growing, and at night he is not there. So there is both this longing and a questioning about whether God is going to show up at a particular moment in the way that Isak is looking for it. So definitely a hunger for connection for the divine, which we see appear in a number of other characters. Here, the hunger is that for sexual intimacy, for emotional closeness, for creating a kind of rapport with someone. It involves infidelity, obviously, but a kind of connection that is lacking in the home. Isak is recalling, and we have a close-up here. He's hiding in the shadows. He's recalling his wife, who is relatively evenly lit, but in shadow. This is darkly lit, but except for the backlight that's catching her hair, across her body she is evenly lit. As she's stepping into, from Isak's perspective, and from a high-minded moral perspective, she's heading into dark territory here by betraying her husband with another man. This is also a very uncomfortable shot because of the way they're playing hide and not hide and go seek, but kind of a like come and get me, come hither kind of thing. I found it very uncomfortable. I don't know what your own opinion might be, but the game that they're playing involves his pulling her head back by her hair, before kissing her violently. I guess, to each their own, but it doesn't look very tender to me. Looks more like a lead up to a kind of, well, I don't like the word, but it's more like fucking is what they're moving towards, as opposed to making love. It's just kind of violent the way it plays out. Here we see that Isak is contemplating all the opportunities that have been missed in the past. Marianne has just explained to him what's going on between her and her husband, Isak's son, and you see tears on her face right through here. She's at her most vulnerable, and he wonders whether perhaps I should reach out and care for my son and my daughter-in-law in ways I haven't in the past. He's kept himself aloof, been very principled, from his own perspective, and ensuring that they pay back the money that he loaned them. By the end of the film, he's going to change his mind about that. And here we see that they are brought into a very intimate space by the shot being taken from outside her window. Usually the interior shots are balanced, where we see them sitting next to one another, both facing us, or from his angle. But this is from her angle. We're getting into her space in a way we haven't before. And by her sharing this story, she's invited her father-in-law into this vulnerable space. And he just he wants to help if he can. This is not an establishing shot, though it looks like one. It's actually one of the closing shots of the film and captures Isak's parents as he's recalling them. Towards the end of one of his dream states, the young Sarah leads him up to this prominence where he looks out and remembers his parents the way they were when they were in a good mood and on vacation, right? They seem to be also dressed in bright colors, white and inclined, having a picnic, fishing, very, very relaxed. The storm clouds that are on the horizon are not close enough to ruin their day. Let's talk a little bit about camera angles, a little bit more about this. So this is another one of those shots that appears to be an open doorway, as if we're being drawn through a portal into the same space occupied by Isak. He does seem to be the king of his domain. There's a very strong triangular shape here, very close to the center, though not so centered that it would lose tension. There's a little bit more tension because it's off-center. And we see him turning to Agda, who is his constant companion, and there's playful banter between them, tinged with bitterness every now and then, but they do seem to rely on one another, particularly Isak relying on this woman to tend to all his needs, but there seems to be kind of a codependence, a need for each other. This, however, is a low-angle shot. We are given an idea that Isak was this moral authority who would talk about poetry and sin. We have at this moment Sarah recalling how when she was trying to be intimate with him, he often brought up high-minded ideals. He wasn't silly. He wasn't a scoundrel like the guy that she ends up marrying. He wasn't a wild man. He was more formal, and she was drawn to that and repulsed by it. He's on such a terribly high level, we get in the English translation from Swedish. There's an awe of Isak conveyed here, and perhaps a bit of fear, because he is so very moral and doesn't seem to admit the human element. And here he's looking down with perhaps, I don't think he's intended to have a scowl here, but you wonder if he had this kind of look when he ran across human failings and frailty in his youth. There's a sense of condescension or judgment, and the camera angle here captures that perfectly. Here there's another low angle, but Sarah is being given power in this scene, a kind of maternal power. She is helping out with one of her siblings' children, caring for a child that Isak will never have with her, right? He wants to be in an intimate space with her, to be married to her, and this suggests wishful thinking. Of course, the dark silhouette of the tree behind her and the darkness of the lighting, because it's close to nighttime, suggests that perhaps a storm is coming into her life. And it's suggested later on that her marriage was not a happy one with this guy, although this moment seems rather idyllic as she plays the piano and he listens to her, and then they kiss passionately and then sit down to dinner together. We are looking at her level, as if we're seated next to her, and there's a window which provides a bit of an obstacle, yet at the same time it's a transparent barrier which invites us to get closer. One of those dream scenes here we have one of those dream scenes that's very uncomfortable for Isak, because despite how much he is stored in his mind, despite all of his successes as a professional, here he is confronted with questions he doesn't know. This is basically gibberish on the wall behind him. He's supposed to read it, make sense of it, apply it, and he can't, because it's an impossible task. And the lack of agency that he feels is captured very well by this high-angle shot looking down at him as if he were a school child in a chair who's being assessed by this man who is actually a very ill-behaving husband he met earlier in the day, but now has been translated into a kind of academic authority in this dream sequence. Here, you notice the power differential between Isak, who's asking, could we be close? Could we be friends? Call each other by first names? And Agda, who is not interested in that. So she's saying no, she holds the power. So we have a low angle looking up at her and down at Isak. But she says, I'll leave the door ajar if you need anything was kind of flirtatious, I thought, there. Who knows what could happen later in the evening. Sarah here appearing. She is diminished by distance, by her youth, by the camera angle here, which is looking down at her. And yet, at the same time, there is this longing. She's reaching up to him and saying, "It's you I really love," because remember, those two boys are fighting over her. They both want her affection. And she, today, tomorrow, always, looking at him. This is one of the last moments that we see him in a position of authority. Here's another as he comes up to the cliff's edge to look out at his parents in that shot we looked at earlier, and finds that he's not alone. That despite the fact that his wife left him for another man, and that Sarah left him, here she returns and she walks with him hand in hand into a moment of clarity where he sees not what was, not what can ever be, but he sees a kind of hopefulness which has been lacking in his life for so long. This dream conveys to him a truth. And he says earlier in the film that, "I think my dreams are trying to tell me something that conscious I'm not willing to accept." But by the end of the film, he has begun to accept that he is imperfect, and it humbles him and puts him in a position where he's willing to reach out to others. Just a few more comments on lighting. This is the earliest dream sequence, very surrealistic, where he's walking about, and the high key lighting, this is almost blown out. There's a lack of detail here. You almost can't see the difference between the background and the edge of his face. There's such strong lighting. And though it is high key lighting, we do get a little bit of shadow in very concentrated places in these cavernous eyes that look like a skull almost, anticipating his imminent demise. Here he emerges from the darkness, emerges from memory, from the background. It's like he's witnessing things that have a life to them which is lacking in his own present circumstances. He emerges from the darkness to step into the situation and actually partake a little bit. Obviously, this is not a time travel movie. He does not alter anything from the past, but he does seem at times to be interacting with these characters. He's so close to them. This is a very odd shot for the time, and there's debates online about what lens was used, but there did seem to be some consensus. This is not a lens baby, which would be developed later in film history, but a Carl Zeiss Biofart lens, which seems to capture that central point, and the rest of it's like a very blurry bokeh effect, right? As if things are swirling around him to suggest disorientation, as if the world is moving about him faster than he can track it. Here he's standing at the window, looking out, trying to penetrate. There's so many windows that he's trying to penetrate, trying to reach back into the past, wondering what he might learn if he were to look at the same events with new eyes, like the infidelity of his wife being one example here. And notice that, again, she has the even lighting with the back lighting on her hair, but even here, whereas this guy looks rather nefarious, I don't like what little I know of him by the way he handles his lover here. He looks a little bit monstrous, and the lighting, this very strong lighting here, which hides half of his face and casts the rest into shadow, captures that. We have light coming through stained glass here as Isak is thinking about the past, suggesting a kind of religious element. Top lighting often suggests the divine. He is in a cathedral, but this is not for him a religious experience, even though he does move in a more moral direction. Bergman's own experience with religion was rather tense, and he was exploring things and asking lots of questions. His father had been a pastor, but Bergman was moving away from organized religion, and yet still engaging questions about the divine and the supernatural, about the Christological themes and motifs, and also life and death and the possibility of an afterlife, which is arguably intimated in this shot. Here, a very private moment. I think the darkness here, because the light is behind Marianne, as she admits has grown close to the father-in-law that she was repulsed by at the beginning of the day. And it's almost as if we are voyeurs looking at something that we're not supposed to witness because of the darkness. She is breaking down her walls even further than she has prior to this moment, and giving him a kiss, saying that we can perhaps move forward in unity as she is also, it looks like, restoring her relationship with her husband, who's decided that he needs his wife. He's going to be okay with her having a child. So perhaps the film ends with more hope than it began.